You may be wondering why I'm wearing a donut t-shirt. Is it because I like the style? Is it because I needed to wear lighter clothing because we're in the summertime?
I'm gonna let you make a believer out of me, damn it.
Or is my laundry dirty and I didn't have anything better to wear?
One of the many moments of truth is upon us.
Welcome to VTEC Academy. You're about to get schooled. Recently, I got asked to go out to Donut Media and help them, I should say I volunteered, and help school them on how to do a K-swap. One of the things I decided to do while I was there was help out with the wiring. So I made a Hasport sub-harness for a K-swap, and I decided to try something a little bit different. So I'm going to show you guys how I modified their harness. Maybe you might want to try something like that as well. Anyway, let's get going. They're using a Type R motor, and this is the harness that came with it apparently. One of the reasons I know that it's a Type R engine harness, if you come over here to this part, right as it drops off the back of the coil powers, you'll notice one of the plugs is missing. It's got VTEC solenoid, it's got the oil pressure light, it has VTC, it has crank angle sensor, but it's missing VTEC oil pressure, and Type R motors didn't have those. Now I'm guessing the reason they didn't do that is because they didn't want VTEC switching on and off when there was a slight change in oil pressure, and that was basically on the Type R. I think in Japan, they're a lot more trusting that the people driving those cars are going to keep it full of oil all the time and not need that as a safety feature. So the JDM Type R motor just didn't have a VTEC oil pressure sensor on it. Otherwise, it's almost identical to the wiring harness we find on the Type S. So it has everything else we need to. I think whoever had this car had some sort of auxiliary thing going on. I'll have to figure out what that is, but we'll remove that. But basically this harness is in excellent shape and we don't really need to do anything with it. So I'm not going to do a lot of modification to this particular part of it. The majority of the modification I'm going to do is actually to the Hasport sub-harness. Oh, and by the way, they had the stock charge harness. I did do some modifications of that. I first off stripped out, this is the starter connector and starter wire. I'm going to crimp on a new end to go to the fuse box. That's what's going to power the fuse box. I may wind up shortening this as well, rather than having a bunch of extra length. I think we can cut it down by probably about 10 or so inches. I'll do that actually on a car to see what I need to do. I have ends very similar to this that I can crimp on. I have ends for this that will work on the fuse box, so we're going to do that. I also have on the stock positive shields. If you're going to race a car, they want you to have a positive shield or anything. So I have this one that I took off another car that had a damaged harness. So we'll be replacing the positive cover as well. So we're going to do that. The other thing I did was I stripped out the alternator harness as well. We're going to go ahead and lay that in with the other harness inside the car, and then I'll crimp on the proper end here to go to the fuse box. There is, of course, the alternator connects to the fuse box. That's how it charges the battery. And then, of course, the battery has a plug that goes to the fuse box as well. So we'll just crimp those ends on there after we get our sizing correct. Last thing I did is I also stripped out the charge harness. So this is the alternator charge harness section. This all plugs in right underneath the intake manifold. Somebody had already looked like they stomped on the NOx sensor wiring. That's the starter plug. That connects to the starter. So I'm just going to reloom this and make it its own little section. I'll repair that so it's in good shape and get it all ready. Now the connector for this, if you get a harness that's damaged, the connector for this comes two types. This smaller type comes on a lot of the K24s and a lot of the newer motors. And this larger type is the type that comes on the Type S and the Type R from the RSX. This is the correct one. I happen to have these terminals. And if you find yourself in a similar situation, you can actually purchase these terminals and these connectors, or even these connectors, from Corsa Technic. There'll be a link in the show notes for that. They also have alternator connectors and these connectors here if you have damaged ones on your car, so you can replace all that. I don't believe they have these side mount spade connectors, but usually those aren't damaged, and you can just get kind of a one. But if you want to use this handy little rubber one, you need the side style ones. You can purchase those from a company called cycleterminal.com. They have them. Might take a course or two. I don't recall them having them, but they might. So anyway, I have all the stuff I need to do. This is the adapter harness. What I did is I made one without all the loom on it and everything, and I did some custom stuff to it. So normally this harness here, let me get one of the ones that came off Budget EG. This is kind of a typical one that you would buy from Hasport or from another company. Just to kind of show you what it has, you have your C101 connector interfaces with the engine harness. I actually added some other stuff. This set of wires normally would get scotch locked in to the ECU wires. I actually made a connector so that this harness could come back out. It comes with a data link connector, comes with a ground that winds up going inside, kind of redundant. You could actually do this out in the engine bay. In fact, I suggest you do it out in the engine bay. And this plug interfaces with the data link connector that is on an EG. Then from the other end, we have our O2 sensor. And then we have this other section of harness that goes across the firewall that connects to the shock tower plugs on the driver's side or left side of the car. A lot of the functions for the dash go through here, and a lot of the power things go through here. So you have coil power and igniter power, and then you have some other powers in here that are switched, and plus idiot light, water temp, alternator, things of that nature. Not alternator, radiator fan switch, those types of things also go through here as well. And then we have this little subsection that goes out into the engine bay. This would be a radiator fan switch. These are set up to use like a radiator hose adapter. Normally there would also be a ground wire with this as well. This is for your water temp sensor. By the way, if you use a water temp sensor on a radiator hose adapter, you need to do a ground on that as well, because water is not a good conductor of electricity. There's not enough salts in it and things like that to make it a good conductor. So you would have a ground as well that went to the radiator hose adapter. And then this is for the fan switch, and there's actually a ground in here. So normally when you get this harness from Hasport, this ground wire is connected to a ground loop that goes on that, and then there's another, and then this ground loop that grounds inside on the firewall. But honestly, I think it's actually a better idea to ground it on the engine. So that is a change I'm going to be making to the harness in the future here. This, again, typical harness you would buy. A lot of companies make versions of this. You can get them from K-Tuned, you can get them from Hybrid Racing, you can get them from Rywire, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, custom. So I made a harness that is quite a bit different. If you notice, basically we have our relay for the air-fuel ratio sensor, we have our E-plug, we have our C101 plug that interfaces with thing, and we have a small handful of wires that are actually going to get connected into ECU connectors. Like this is for the brake switch, for the malfunction indicator lamp. It escapes me what the other ones are off the head. ELD, forget, there's a fourth one, I don't remember what it is, but that's what happens with these. So again, I'll probably make up a separate connector for these so that we can unplug it from the harness, so it's not like permanently in the car and require you to do something exotic in order to get it out of the car. This will run along the firewall, connect in with the left-hand shock tower. I may actually cut it and make a connector just to shorten it. We'll see how the routing goes when we get there. But the main thing I did was I separated out a couple of our things. I separated out the air fuel sensor plug. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm actually going to lay that into the engine harness, and then I'm going to put these into the C101 plug. And then normally, since it would normally lay inside here, I've taken all the wires that would be going to the air fuel sensor and I just looped them to open places on this harness so I can connect to them from the other side on the engine harness. So this is going to become part of the engine harness. I think that will clean up the look of the harness so you don't have a bunch of extra stuff just kind of laying on top of the harness in there. So that's one thing I've done. The other thing I've done is, oh, by the way, if you really want to clean your engine bay, one of the things you can do is you can take the two plugs on the left-hand shock tower and you can actually bring those back inside the car, and you can connect this under the dash actually. And there's actually this large plug in there that you wanted to eliminate. You have to get the other half of that plug, but you could also connect it there if you wanted to. But I would suggest just bringing them inside and then using these, connecting these up underneath the dash. So you could kind of eliminate that whole wiring harness out there in the dash. I think that that might be a nice, really clean look that people like. I think what we're going to do is we're going to run this across the bottom of the subframe and then come up the shock tower. I've left it kind of long, so we should be able to reach and do that. We'll see how it looks after we get it in the car. Then the other thing is I made a separate sub-harness for the water temp sensor and the radiator fan. And again, here's my water temp sensor. If you're running it on a hose adapter, you'd like it like this. If you're running on the engine though, you don't need that ground. You would just connect it straight in like that. And this is our radiator fan. Now what's happening is they've decided to change the way they want to do everything. They bought a hybrid racing radiator, and that actually has mounting positions for both the water temp sensor and for the radiator fan switch. Now the radiator fan switch is down in the bottom of the radiator, which is where it belongs. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but the way water flows in a Honda is it comes out of the bottom hose, goes up through the radiator, and then back in from the top. One of the things I don't like about this setup that they're doing with the hybrid racing is they put the water temp sensor up top, so you're going to get the temperature of it after it cools. Now the water temp sensor isn't particularly accurate. I shouldn't say that. The gauge isn't particularly accurate. So what winds up happening is there's a pretty large range, probably from 180 to probably well over 210, that your temperature gauge stays pretty much centered in your gauge. So measuring it up top, you're not going to really get a sense of your car overheating until it's really too late. So a better place to put your water temp sensor for your gauge cluster is actually on the engine itself, okay, or in a radiator hose adapter down low. You need a fairly long lower radiator hose in order to have room to put it in there, but that's a good idea to do that. I think what we're going to do with the donut car is we're going to actually go ahead and leave the water temp sensor up in the upper part of the radiator, and then we're going to add a actual gauge, a sweeping gauge, like an aftermarket gauge, and we're going to mount that in the lower radiator hose with a radiator hose adapter. And that way we get an actual real reading of what the temperature is coming out of the engine, and if we have a problem with overheating, we're going to know it a lot more, we're going to know it immediately. The only time that that would be a problem is if for some reason your thermostat was stuck, and that might cause a problem. But your ECU should actually go into limp mode if that happens, because the temperature will rise really high on the head, and you'll be able to see that high temperature on the head. Still, I think ideally what you want to do is you want to mount your gauge sensor on the engine, probably where the upper radiator hose is. There's actually water flowing through there all the time, even when the thermostat is closed. So that's a good idea, and it would give you a more accurate reading of what your water temperature is. Even before the thermostat opens, water is flowing from the back side of the thermostat housing through a hose that comes along in front of the head and up through that upper radiator hose outlet. So that should give you a true feel for what, or should give your gauge cluster inside your car a true feel for what the actual temperature is. So again, they're kind of going with a redundant solution so that they don't damage the motor. They actually did quite a bit of work to that motor rebuilding it, and they want to try and keep it safe so they don't have to get a new one. I'm sure a lot of you people here watching this are actually Donut Media fans, and they've seen how they've blown up a couple of 350Z and Subaru motors Obviously the Honda motor is a lot more robust, so it's probably not going to be an issue, but still they want to try and protect it as best they can so they're not having problems. Anyway, I'm going to get started on this, and we'll start modifying and see what it looks like when it turns out. Okay, first up is our repair of the knock sensor. You can see it's kind of smashed out flat. Somebody stepped on this, obviously broke the connector. Not uncommon to get that stuff damaged. I'm going to go ahead and reuse this rubber seal. It's still soft and pliable. That is my number one determining factor whether or not I'm going to reuse something. We'll strip back enough of the connector to fully go through. Whoops, we'll need a little more than that. There we go. When you crimp, you need to make sure that a little bit of wire sticks out past the parts that you crimp. Grab my favorite crimpers here. By the way, there's notes in the description how to get to our Amazon page, and you can buy yourself these. These are IWIS 1424B crimpers. They have crimpers for 3 sizes of wire. I'm using the smallest one, and then they also have these round crimpers for crimping around insulators. It gives you a nice round crimp just like the factory. Give it a good tug to make sure it stays on. All right, this is our connector. I actually pulled out the old pin already, but let me show you how to open it up. There is a little slot right there. You can go in there and pry on. Be gentle with it so you don't wreck the plastic. Once you pull that out, there's a retaining side of this piece, and that is going to go. So when you're pulling the old clip out, you can use a pick tool and slide it along. There'll be one side of the terminal you can see. You just slide it along there, and you'll feel it bottom out against a plastic clip, and you lift that up, and then you can pull the old wire out. This one was actually kind of difficult to get because somebody had cut it out pretty much flush. So what I did was I held it in a vise. After pulling the top off, I went and lifted it, and then I used a small screwdriver to push the terminal out the bottom, and then was able to easily get it out. But anyway, that clip that I had to lift, that's going to go into this spot right here. So that means the side opposite the clip, put it in, not enough, it needs to lock in. It goes the other way. It goes opposite that. All right, so it's obviously clipping on something different than I thought it was. So there's 2 prongs. The 2 prongs are going to go opposite that. It slides in like that, locks into place. I must lock in behind these 2 prongs. All right, so it's locked in place. Then I'm going to reinsert the retainer. This actually locks that clip that you lift up to get it out. It locks it down so it can't pull out. So that is repaired. The only thing I need to do now is wrap it with a little bit of split loom to make it look pretty, and then we're ready to move on to the next part. Okie doke, I got my split loom and my tape. Let's dress it out so it looks like factory. Split loom is to protect the wiring. I used to feel like it was for waterproofing, but having worked with enough harnesses over the years, might actually be for oil proofing. I've had some pretty oily ones, generally speaking, because of the fact that people's cars drip over time. I've said this many times, I'll say it again. When you get there ready to the very end, leave about a finger's width of tape and smooth it on as opposed to stretch it on. When you stretch it on, it will start to back off, and when it does, it'll leave sticky residue underneath there. So just smooth it down and it will stay there rather than pull away. Another thing that happens is sometimes the edges will curl up as it recovers from you stretching it. So don't stretch it on, push it on. You can stretch it in the middle here, but at the very end, don't stretch it on. Alrighty, handy. All right, next we have our O2 sensor. Now, coming out of the firewall grommet, this is more than enough length to reach down to our O2 sensor, so we're going to bring it back to the firewall grommet right there. So we need to carefully cut all this tape off without damaging the rubber grommet. Then we can feed this wire through, and that should get us our proper length. Now, these clips are used for metal clips on the firewall on an RSX to kind of hold the harness out of harm's way, because the header, passes down right behind it. On an EG, EKA, DC2, you can actually zip tie it to some of the brake line brackets and stuff like that to kind of keep it out of the way, so you don't need to save these things. So, I mean, they're fun to try to use and stuff like that, but you wind up having to make brackets in order to use them. So we'll actually clean this up with new tape. I was just getting it out of the way to make it a little bit easier to work with. All right, now let's work on this tape right here. I'm using enough pressure to cut through the tape without cutting through the rubber. The rubber is a little bit more, since it's not plasticky, it's a little bit more resistant to the blade. Surprising, another thing is really resistant to the blade is the wire, the covering on the wire. You can cut that pretty good with the knife without damaging the wires. A lot of people have recommended I use it looks like a stitch remover for sewing, but they use it for removing the loom. I've never really had good luck with those. Okie doke. Got enough peeled back. We should be able to slide our wires through there easy enough. If you can't, I suggest sliding a screwdriver through there, a Phillips head, and that'll stretch it out a little bit, and then you can slide it right next to the Phillips head. Well, that's what I'm going to do. Back in the day when I used to work on car stereos, we would actually have a tube we would slide in there. It had a cone on one end. We'd slide the tube through, take the cone off, put the wires in the tube, and then pull the tube out. Worked pretty slick. I'm sure somebody still makes that. As each one comes through, I pull it away from the screwdriver so I can slide the wire next to the screwdriver where it wants to work much more easily. Alrighty, I'm going to pull it all the way down. We have enough to reach our C101 plug. All right, that is through. Now, what I could do, and I think I'm going to go ahead and do, is pull my water temp sensor wire through. Honestly, I think it's best to put the water temp on the head. I was thinking about putting it on the radiator, but I think I'm going to advise them against that. Might as well have the gauge work as well too. That way, if the thermostat doesn't open up, they can get a clue that it's getting hot, not just from a check engine light coming on. Sometimes the check engine light comes on and you're kind of puzzled and you don't really know what's going on. So it'd be nice to be able to look at the temp gauge and see a problem. The K series are famous anyway for having difficulties with bubbles in the head, where you have an air bubble in there, it's not really coming out. And the temp sensor on the head will see that. It doesn't see it consistently. I mean, you can drive around and you put the brakes on and all of a sudden you see your temperature spike and then you take off again and you see it drop down again. But still, information is better than less information, so we'll go ahead and lay that in there too. Now that means we're going to have to open up this entire harness, bring it all the way out here, and we will bring it to, well, let's see here. We will bring it to basically out here, and then make it long enough to go up on top of the, on the head. We'll take an adapter and place it where the vent shut valve is. That's that little valve that sits right on top of the upper radiator hose fitting. A couple companies make a adapter for that because the temp sensor from the Honda is actually British pipe thread, which is very close to the American thread. You can actually take, I'll grab the sensor and talk about that more, but you can grab a sensor and clean up the threads a little bit with the British pipe thread tap, and then you can thread it in there with some Honda Bond, and it works just fine. Or you can go buy one from K-Tuned or whatever. They actually have one that's designed specifically for that. Probably a better idea, but we're under a little bit of a time constraint. But anyway, that's on. Next, I'm going to put through our water temp sensor, and we are not going to need our ground switch because we are going to be on the head. So I'm going to feed a wire through. Hopefully the other wires made enough room. Maybe not. Yes, they did. Pull out enough so I can reach the C101 plug. Got it. I'm going to put a piece of tape over that so I don't accidentally pull it back. Yeah, we'll go all the way to the tube, or to the loom. So now what's going to happen is this wire is going to get laid in, come out right here, have about, well, we'll have this much slack on it. I'll just add the loom and the connector when I actually have it in the car, and I can check it out and see exactly what length it is. But it's going to come out right at this joint right here. I'll go ahead and tape it up with some loom on it. I'm going to fast forward through that part of it because it's kind of boring watching me do all that. So yay, let's do it. Basically that is done. This is modified. I think we can move on to pinning all these wires in to our C101 plug. That's next. Put a few pieces of tape on here just to kind of guide it in the general direction we want to go. There's two types of terminals that go in these C101 plugs. There's a large one and a small one. Again, purchased these from Corsa Technic, so I'm adding them in there. First thing I need to do is actually unsnap the lock. Now, one lock's actually already been broken off. These things are fairly brittle, so it's kind of common to have them break when you try to open them up. But basically, unsnap the back, lift it up a little bit, and pull it away, and that unsnaps it. This other side is missing totally. I'll probably find another one just to snap it on, just to keep everything locked in place. It doesn't hurt to have the pieces that hold this on broken off. It's not going to affect the utility of the thing. So anyway, let's start off by shortening these. Yeah, we'll shorten them one by one because some may go farther than the others. So let's grab my harness and make sure we match them up wire for wire. Okay, we're going to start with the large connector first. That would be the white wire. That's going to go in the spot right here. Now what's interesting is there's actually a terminal in there, but that terminal doesn't connect to anything on the other side. I think they just use it as a splice joint. So let's pull this out. When you go into the wiring manual for the RSX Type S, they talk about this red wire with a white stripe being plugged in right here, and on the other side, nothing. So we're just going to take this off, and we're going to seal it up with some tape so that it doesn't short to anything. Just kind of fold it back out of the way. We'll just tape it into the harness like so. It'll still do what it needs to be, but it will no longer be in our connector. We're going to use that hole. So we're going to flip this back, tape it right there. Also tape all the other wires there as well. Bring it down, cut it to the appropriate length. Strip it back. We're going to strip it a little extra long actually. And we're going to fold this over in half because it's going to be on a larger terminal. So this is our terminal right here. Again, I fold it in half, kind of double it up because it normally would clip onto a fatter wire. And then we're going to plug it in. All right. There we go. We'll do this red wire on the end here. Next, we'll do this red-yellow wire. It goes right next to it. You always want to test pull them. So this one over here is going to be our green wire. We don't have that one yet, so let's go the next one to it, which is yellow. That one right there. Next to that is a black-white wire right there. Let me show you what I mean by having enough wire to extend past the crimp. Notice I crimped it twice because the first time I pulled it, it shifted. That wasn't good enough. Let me show you what I mean by having the wire extend past that smaller crimp. That's important. That helps lock it in. All right. All those wires are in on that side. The only one we have missing is our green wire. Now, our green wire, that is going to be for the radiator fan switch. So I think what I'll do is I'll run that to this point here, and I'll just take the wire out. I think we're going to wind up running it along the right-hand side of the frame rail. So I haven't decided whether or not we're going to put any loom on it or anything, but we'll go ahead and put that wire through, crimping an end on it, feeding it through this part, and then we'll figure out how to tape it up once we get in the car. I'll be bringing a short length of black wire as well, and the black wire is there for the purpose of the ground, because the plug for the radiator fan switch basically creates a ground. That's what turns the fans on. So this wire is going to go from the radiator fan switch to a chassis ground. This wire will come back all the way to the harness to communicate through the left-hand shock tower, which is the long plug, well, left-hand shock tower on our sub-harness until the radiator fan relay to turn on. So start off with crimping a piece on here, plugging it in. That's going to plug in right there. All I need to do is remove this one. Okay, we got a lot of slack here we can use to run up the frame rail to get over to our radiator fan switch. The engine harness is repaired and modified. It is ready to go. The adapter harness is ready to go as well. I have The only thing we need to do possibly is loom it once we decide where it's going to go. So I'll bring loom with me to dress it all up. But we are ready to rock and roll here. Their harness is complete. So just to kind of recap the modifications, I decided to run the O2 sensor inside this harness. We're actually going to run the harness through the AC opening because they are removing the AC and the heater in this particular car for the purpose of race car to lighten it up. So I actually made this little piece right here. This bolts where the AC port is, where your two AC lines come out. And it has a little rib on it, as you can see, that allows you to take the stock rubber grommet and just stretch it right around there and put it on. So it's going to seal up the firewall real nicely. We still need to figure out a way to get the wiring out to run over to the left-hand shock tower, but there's another hole right down there to the left of this opening. We can probably just use that one. We'll modify the rubber grommets on that, plug it all back in, and that'll be nicely sealed as well. Remember, on a race car, you don't want any holes coming from the engine bay into the car, into the cabin, in case there was ever a fire, so you want to be really careful about that kind of stuff. Nobody plans for fire, but you should plan to not have a problem if you have a fire. So that's why I made this. And that product will probably be for sale at some point on Hasport's website, but I need to test it, see if it works. So this is the first one I made. I just kind of got the idea when I was making the harness. I thought it'd be kind of cool to do. So we'll try it out and see if it works. I got this thing done enough. We can install it in the car. I'll put it all in a box. And remember to bring it with me Wednesday when I head back, or Tuesday night when I head back to Donut. You guys won't be seeing this video until after the Donut video, but I have plans for more videos with other YouTubers. If you have a suggestion, somebody you want me to team up with and do a video, why don't you leave it down in the comments section. And tell me what you think about the guys from Donut. They're a bunch of really nice guys. It was a lot of fun meeting them, hanging out with them, and helping them and schooling them for this particular swap. Please think about liking and subscribing. We're over 100,000. Next stop, maybe 500,000. Anyways, we'll talk to you later. Bye.